She came to divorce court with their newborn son, but he sat beside his mistress, unaware she was his. Hi, my beautiful family, the greatest family in the world. I hope you're all doing well. May God bless each and every one of you. Before we start, I need to say something from the bottom of my heart. Some channels are stealing my hard work and re-uploading my videos. I've reported them to YouTube, and if you ever see my content being copied, please report those channels. Together we can protect this family and the hard work behind it. I also have one complaint. Many of you have stopped liking and commenting. Have you forgotten me? Every like and every comment gives me the strength to keep creating these stories for you. I love you all, and your support means more than you know. Now, with a heavy heart, let's begin today's story. The chicken was still steaming when Nathaniel laid the envelope on the table, and the corner of it landed in a drop of sauce. And Solène watched the grease bloom into the paper and thought, absurdly, that she would remember that stain longer than his face. "What is this?" "Read it," he said. "Please, before either of us says anything we can't take back." He was still in his coat. That was the detail her mind kept returning to. Later, in the weeks when she took the night apart, piece by piece. 9 years in this house, and he stood in his own dining room dressed to leave it. She wiped her hands on her apron, opened the envelope, and read the first page, standing up. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Both parties agree. Both parties sign. The room did something strange then. The candles kept burning and the food kept steaming and everything held its shape, and underneath all of it the floor simply left. "You're leaving me. I'm asking us to end it like adults. No court fight, no lawyers tearing each other apart. We sign, we split what's ours, and in a few months we're both free. It's the kindest way to do this, Solène." Kind. She set the papers down next to the bread she'd baked that morning. "You waited until I'd cooked. I didn't know you were doing all this. You knew I do this every Friday. 9 years of Fridays." Her voice stayed low. She could feel her pulse in her ears, and somewhere below her ribs a flutter, small and secret, and both of her hands wanted to go to it, and she made them stay at her sides. "Take your coat off, Nathaniel." "Why?" "Because a man who ends a marriage should at least have the courage to stand in the room while he does it, not halfway out the door with his keys in his pocket." He took the coat off. He hung it over the chair, a guest's gesture, and sat down across from her at a table set for a celebration only she knew about, and she stayed standing, because standing was the last territory she owned. "There's someone," she said. It wasn't a question. Some knowledge doesn't arrive, it surfaces, and she understood that she'd been holding it underwater for months. The trips that grew a day longer, the phone face down on the nightstand like a small dead animal, the way he'd started saying her name less, as if it cost him something. "This isn't about anyone else. This is about us. We stopped being us a long time ago, and you know it. Say her name or get out of my house." The candle flame bent in a draught. He looked at his hands, and his hands told her before his mouth did. "Bryn," he said. "She's with the brokerage on the 4th Street deal. Solène, it didn't start until we were already—" "Don't." One word, and it landed like a dropped pan. "Don't you dare build me a timeline that makes you decent. You don't get both, Nathaniel. You don't get the mistress and the clean conscience. Pick one, because I'm only leaving you with one." He stood up then too, and the fight came all the way out of its cage. He said she'd gone cold years ago, and he'd been living with a roommate who ran a bakery. She asked when exactly he'd decided her fatigue was a character flaw, whether it was before or after she built that bakery from a folding table while he traveled on another company's money. He said she never let him in after they lost the first baby, and the sentence was barely out of his mouth before he knew it was the wrong door to open. Solène went very still. "You were in Denver," she said quietly. I lost our child on a Tuesday and told the doctors my husband was traveling, and the nurse held my hand because someone had to. You flew home 3 days later. 3 days, Nathaniel, and you have carried that around for 2 years as the story of how I shut you out. That's not fair. No, it is not. She picked up the papers and held them out to him, and her hand did not shake, and she watched him notice that it didn't. I want you to hear what I say next, because it's the last free thing I'll ever give you. I am not signing this. Not tonight, not in a month, not with your lawyer standing on my porch. You want to trade 9 years for a woman from a work deal, then you'll do it the hard way, in a courtroom, in front of a judge, where you'll have to say all of it out loud. I will not hold the door for you. You'd rather drag us both through a year of hell out of pride. Call it pride, if that helps you sleep next to her. She walked to the front door and opened it to the October cold. Get out of my house. It's my house too. Then get out of my evening. You can have the house when the court gives it to you. He gathered his coat. In the doorway he paused, and for one breath he looked like the man who had once stood in the rain outside her first stall, handing out samples to strangers because she was too shy to shout. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. No, she said. You just wanted it not to count. The door clicked shut, soft and careful, and she stood in the empty dining room until his engine faded down Mohawk Street. Then she walked into the kitchen, past the untouched dinner, to the counter where the cake sat under its glass dome, honey gold, dressed in lavender, perfect. Beside it lay the small, hand-lettered card she'd made to stand against his wine glass at dessert. One word on it, a name that belonged to her grandfather first, a man who'd driven a city bus for 30 years and never once broke a promise. Her hand finally went to her belly. 17 weeks of secret, kept past the week she'd lost the last one, kept until it was safe, and tonight had been the night, and the night was gone. Not like this, she whispered, and slid the card into her bag, down deep. You deserve better than tonight, Ezra. We both do. She scraped the entire dinner into the trash, plates and all her effort, and kept only the cake. Chapter 2. Pearl Ray asked no questions when her daughter's car pulled up on Aberdeen Avenue with 2 suitcases and October in her face. She opened the door, looked her over the way she used to check her for fevers, and said, Your room's cold. I'll get the space heater. That was Lyndon. That was Pearl. Grief got fed before it got interviewed. It was 2 days before Selene said the word divorce out loud, at the kitchen table, over coffee she wasn't drinking. Pearl listened all the way through, without touching her cup. And when the part about the pregnancy came, her mother closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them they were wet and furious and proud all at once. He doesn't know. He handed me an envelope, Mama. Whatever I said next was going to live inside that envelope forever. My baby is not a rebuttal. So when does he learn? When the law makes me say it. Adaze says the court papers will ask. Fine. Then he can find out the way he chose to tell me. In writing. Pearl studied her a long moment. That's a hard road, baby. Carrying alone. I'm not alone. I'm in your kitchen. Something moved through Pearl's face. Weather over a field. Yes, you are, she said, and got up and put a pot on, and that was the treaty signed. The law office of Adaeze Okafor sat above a print shop on East Broad, and Adaeze herself read the dissolution papers in the time it took her coffee to cool, then dropped them on the desk like junk mail. He can't do a thing with these. Dissolution in Ohio is a 2-key launch. Both spouses sign, both agree on every term, or it doesn't exist. You holding your signature isn't spite, it's a legal wall. So what's his move? Contested divorce, and there his troubles begin because divorce needs grounds. Incompatibility only counts if you agree you're incompatible. Deny it, it's gone. Separation takes a full year on separate roofs. and his affair is grounds for you, never for him. No court in this state hands a man a divorce as a reward for his own adultery." Adaze leaned back. "He's a developer, yes? Then he'll understand this. He's bought a property he can't get zoned. Now, before we file one page, tell me everything the court will eventually know." Solène told her. Adaeze put her pen down halfway through and just listened, and when it was finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The answer we file has to disclose the pregnancy. The form asks directly, and we do not lie to courts. You understand that once it's filed, he'll know within the week." "He'll have it in writing," Solène said. "That's more warning than I got. As your lawyer, I'd advise a phone call first. Softens things. Judges like soft." "And as a woman?" Adaze looked at her over the reading glasses and didn't smile quite. "As a woman, I'd let the paper talk. File it." The complaint came first, though, served on Pearl's porch by a polite young man on a grey November morning. Voss versus Voss, Franklin County, Division of Domestic Relations. Grounds, incompatibility and gross neglect of duty. Pearl read the second phrase over her daughter's shoulder and made a sound like a kettle starting. "Neglect. The man ate your cooking for 9 years and paid a lawyer to type neglect." 2 weeks later, their answer went in. Incompatibility denied. Neglect denied. Counterclaim adultery. And on the disclosure line, in the flattest language Adaze could draft, the fact of a child of the marriage expected in the spring. "It's in the record as of this morning," Adaze said on the phone. "His counsel will have it by Friday. However a man reacts to news like this, that's who he is. Keep your phone near." Solène kept her phone near. Friday came. Friday went. Across the river, the house in German village had begun to talk to Nathaniel at night. Not in voices, in absences. The oven that was never warm. The radio in the kitchen that no one turned on anymore, tuned to her gospel station, silent. He'd expected the place to feel bigger, without the marriage in it. It felt like a museum after a theft. All frames, nothing in them. He found the card on a Sunday, taking out recycling. Heavy cream stock, folded, her market chalkboard lettering. A menu, chicken with preserved lemon, the pear salad, and at the bottom, larger, underlined with one of her little flourishes, honey lavender cake. He stood by the bin in the cold, holding a piece of cardboard from a dinner that no longer existed and could not explain the weight of it. She lettered cards for occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, openings. His mind walked up to the word occasion, stood in front of it, and turned around. Bryn's car was pulling in. He put the menu in the kitchen drawer, under the takeout flyers, face down, and by the time the front door opened, he had arranged his face into a man who threw things away. The call from his attorney came the following Friday, at dusk. "Their answer's in. She's contesting everything, counterclaiming adultery, and, Nathaniel, there's a disclosure here you need to sit down for. Check your email. Call me back tonight, not tomorrow." He read it standing in the kitchen, Bryn's voice in the other room debating restaurants with her phone. 12 words of court language. A child of the marriage, expected in the spring. He read it 4 times. The words refused to become other words. Bryn appeared in the doorway, saw his face, and crossed the room fast. What happened? He turned the phone toward her. He watched her read it, watched her go pale, and then, in the space of one breath, watched the paleness organize itself into something with edges. "In a court filing," she said slowly. 6 weeks after you asked her to sign, her lawyer discovers a pregnancy in the one document designed to freeze this entire case. "Bryn, I'm just reading what's in front of me, Nate." She handed the phone back, and her voice was gentle, and gentle was the sharpest thing she owned. Question is whether you can. Chapter 3. Bryn Sutter believed in due diligence the way other people believed in God, which is to say publicly and with exceptions for herself. She'd pulled herself out of Zanesville on framing alone, a childhood spent watching her mother iron blouses for a Thursday man who never once stayed till Friday, and she had come away from it with one commandment: never be the woman waiting. So the disclosure in Solene's filing wasn't information to her. It was incoming fire, and she returned it the only way she knew, by reframing the battlefield. "Walk through it with me," she said Sunday morning, setting coffee in front of him like an exhibit. "October, you ask for a dissolution. She refuses, which stalls you. November, you file for real, and within weeks her answer produces a pregnancy. No doctor's note attached, no sonogram. One sentence, drafted by the same attorney who's billing her to fight you. If a rival brought me that document in a deal, what would you tell me it was?" Leverage. The word came out of him before he could inspect it. "Leverage," she agreed, soft as a closing handshake. She was tired a lot. Back in the fall. Off coffee, I think. He was staring at the table, doing archaeology on his own marriage. We barely spoke by then." "Nate." Bryn covered his hand. "You lived with her. If it were real, would a court form be how you found out? Women tell the men they love. Paper is what you serve on an opponent. She's telling you what you are to her now, and it isn't the father of her child, it's the respondent." His attorney, on Monday, tried to hold the line. "Assume it's true. That's my advice, legal and human. If there's a child, custody and support change this entire case, and a father who spent the pregnancy calling it a tactic will wear that in front of a judge like a sandwich board. And if she's using it to jam me—" A tired pause. Then she picked the one lie on earth with a due date. "Nathaniel, it's the easiest claim in the world to verify, which is exactly why I believe it." He hung up and chose Bryn's version because his lawyer's version had a mirror in it. If the filing was true, then he had slid divorce papers across a celebration dinner at a pregnant wife, and the hand-lettered card in his kitchen drawer was what he already suspected it was, and no man voluntarily convicts himself of that. The frame wasn't a lie, he believed. It was a roof he lived under. But roofs leak. By December, he'd read the disclosure so many times he could see it when he closed his eyes. And on the second Saturday of the month, he broke every piece of advice he was paying for and drove to the North Market. The place was full Christmas, wreaths on the beams, a brass trio by the coffee roaster, the smell of bread and cider thick enough to lean on. Ray's Bakery had a line 6 deep, and there she was behind the case, gold scarf over her hair, boxing a pie for an old man in a Vietnam veteran cap, and she was laughing at something he said, head back, unguarded, and the laugh went through Nathaniel like a knife through a tent. She had a life. It was Saturday, and she was surrounded by people, and none of it required him. She was wearing her apron high and loose over a heavy sweater. He looked straight at her, the whole shape of her, and the roof held because he needed it to. Then she saw him, and the light in her face shut off like a breaker thrown. She said something to the girl at the register and came around the case, and she didn't take him aside, didn't soften the geography at all. She planted herself in the aisle in front of her own stall, arms folded, market roaring around them. 1 minute, she said. For 9 years, 1 minute. Use it well. The filing. He kept his voice down, which only made it uglier, a man hissing in a crowd. The disclosure. Solene, look at me. If it's real, why did I read it in a legal document? Who tells a husband that way? A wife who was handed her marriage in an envelope, she said. You set the postage rate, Nathaniel. Don't complain about the mail. If it's true, I have a right to know. You had a right. Her voice never rose, and 2 stalls down a family went on choosing cheese, and that was the horror of it, that a marriage could die in a public aisle at 11 in the morning without one head turning. You had a right for 9 years and a table and a dinner going cold in front of you, and you chose your envelope. Now you come to my counter, in my season, in front of my customers, demanding proof. You'll get every document the law entitles you to, on the schedule the law sets, and not one thing more. That's the arrangement you filed for. This isn't you. This isn't the woman I married. She looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than her whole minute, and what was in her eyes wasn't hate. He'd have known what to do with hate. It was inventory. A merchant assessing damaged goods and deciding finally against the repair. The woman you married, she said, believed a man who kept his coat on. Buy something or step aside. You're blocking Mr. Tillman, and he actually shows up every week. She turned back to the veteran, warm again in one breath, and the warmth wasn't for show, and it wasn't a weapon. It was simply no longer his. And that was what drove Nathaniel out through the wreathed doors into the cold, that of all things. In the car, Bryn had the heater running and one question. Well, nothing. She gave me nothing. He watched the market doors. She talked to me like a stranger who'd skipped the line. Nate. Bryn took his hand and set the last nail with all the tenderness in the world. A woman carrying your child cannot stand 3 feet away and give you nothing. It's not in the species. What you met in there wasn't a mother protecting a baby. It was a litigant protecting a claim. He said nothing. He was thinking unwillingly of the apron, high and loose, and of a card in his kitchen drawer, and the roof groaned but held. Inside, in the back room, Selene lowered herself onto a flower pallet and let the shaking come, both hands pressed under the apron where the sweater rounded, breathing in 4s the way Dr. Osei taught her. That's him, she whispered, when the flutter came, strong now, insistent, an argument all its own. Now you've met, looked right at you, little man. A sound came out of her, half-laugh, cracked down the middle. Looked right at you and asked me for paperwork. Chapter 4. The cuff squeezed, held, exhaled, and Dr. Amara Osei read the number twice before writing it, which Selene had learned was the tell. Say it plain. 144/92, and that's your 3rd climb in a row. At 26 weeks, with your history, this is gestational hypertension. Dr. Osei wheeled the stool close, knee to knee, no desk between them, which was her way. Manageable. But the management is you, sitting down, and I mean it structurally. Market days are done. 4 a.m. bakes, done. Anything over 20 pounds gets lifted by somebody who isn't growing a person. And you learn 3 signs like a prayer. A headache that won't break, lights or spots in your eyes, sudden swelling in your face or hands. Any one of those, you call me that hour, not that evening, that hour. What are we afraid of? Preeclampsia. The doctor didn't dress it up. That was also her way. Blood pressure that turns on the pregnancy itself. If it comes, the only cure on earth is delivery, and it doesn't consult your calendar first. So we don't let it come. Every 2 weeks in this chair. Deal? Selene looked at the ceiling and saw the whole arithmetic at once. Rent on a stall with cold ovens. Keisha alone at the case in the Christmas rush. Adaise's invoices. Joint accounts locked in lawyer stalemate. His attorney contesting temporary support, like each dollar was a beachhead. The bakery is how I eat, Doctor. And this is how Ezra does. Dr. Osei took her hand. Your chart says you grieved the last one alone. I'm telling you the assignment is different now. You have people. Being carried isn't weakness, Selene. It's logistics. Pearl restructured her entire life in a week and dared anyone to mention it. She took the 4 a.m. shifts herself, 66 years old, on the number 2 bus down Cleveland Avenue in the dark, church coat buttoned to the chin, and when Selene fought her on it, Pearl said, I was creaming butter before your daddy owned a razor, now hush, and hung her apron on the hook like a flag planted. Renita Coles arrived like a front rolling in off the lake. School nurse best friend since Lyndon McKinley, loud where Selene was quiet, immune to drama by professional exposure. She built the stall a spreadsheet, appointed Keisha to a captaincy Keisha hadn't applied for, drove Selene to every appointment, and sat in waiting rooms doing crosswords in ink like a woman with no doubts anywhere in her body. The bad night came in late January. The support hearing got continued a second time that morning, and by afternoon the big deck oven at the stall died, and the repairman's estimate was a number that turned the whole month into a choice between fixing it and making rent. Renita found Selene at Pearl's table with the estimate in front of her and her head in her hands. "How short are we?" "It's oven or rent, Nita, not both." "Then we go around the ovens." Renita didn't sit down. She started writing, standing up. "Pearl's congregation, my school, Valentine pre-orders, cash up front. You bake small batch right here in this kitchen sitting on a stool. Keisha runs pickup at the stall. We bridge February on sugar and church ladies." She looked up. "You're not losing that stall in the same winter that man filed on you. I won't have the symmetry." Selene watched the pen move and had to look at the window for a while. "I never asked you for any of this." "I know." Renita kept writing. "Asking's the one thing you're bad at. Lucky for you I don't wait on it." Across town, Walt Voss let himself into his son's house with the key he'd carried since the inspection and stopped in the kitchen doorway. Another woman's handwriting on the fridge, a poster board propped against the toaster, a Florida beach house cut from a magazine, the words "New Chapter" in glued letters. He was still looking at it when Nathaniel came downstairs. "Dad, ever heard of knocking?" 40 years union, I knock at strangers' houses." Walt nodded at the poster board. "That the plan? Florida? Her name is Bryn. If you and Mom would come to dinner." "Jean Okafor's brother called me." Walt turned, and he had the flat, unhurried voice of a man who had spent a working life around things that could kill him. "Says the answer your wife filed tells the court there's a baby coming in the spring. My grandchild, if it's so. Is it so?" "That's what her filing claims." "Claims." Walt let the word sit. "Son, I ran wire through half this city, and the first rule they teach you is the only rule. You don't guess whether a line is live. You test it, every time, because the men who guessed aren't around to disagree." He picked his cap up off the counter. "You've had it in writing since November. 2 months, one phone call to one doctor's office, and you'd know. You haven't made it, because that woman upstairs in your marriage told you the line's dead, and believing her costs nothing today." At the door he stopped, and for the first time his voice showed its age. "Your mother cried after church Sunday. I told her my son tests his lines. Don't make me a liar, Nathaniel." The soft click of the door. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen a long time, 12 feet from a drawer with a menu in it, and made no call. February pressed down on Columbus like a hand. Snow on the market roof, snow on Aberdeen Avenue, the number 2 bus running late in the dark. Selene baked what she was permitted from a stool in Pearl's kitchen, filling church orders. And some evenings Ezra rolled under her ribs like a swimmer making his turn, and she'd stop, flour to the elbow, and hold still until it passed, smiling at no one. On the 19th, a Thursday, the headache came. It parked behind her eyes at noon and would not break, not with water, not with the dark bedroom, and by late afternoon there were silver threads swimming at the edges of the kitchen window, and she heard Dr. Osei's voice, that hour, not that evening, and made the call with steady hands and a hammering heart. Renita ran the lights on Hudson Street. Triage read the numbers, and nobody suggested going home. The word came through the curtain in a resident's low voice, pre-eclampsia, severe features, and then Dr. Osei was there, coat over her weekend clothes, calm as bedrock. "Here's where we are. You're 36 weeks and 2 days, and your body has decided the finish line moves to tonight. The cure is delivery, so we deliver. We start medicine through the IV to protect you from seizures. It'll make you feel like wet cement, that's normal. We start another to bring the pressure down, and then we induce, and you have this baby the way you've done every hard thing in your life, Selene, yourself. It'll be long, it'll be work. I'll be here the whole way. He's 3 weeks early. He's 36 weeks and stubborn, same as his mother. The team from Children's will be in the room. Now. Dr. Osei gripped her hand. Who do we call? They're already in the hallway, Renita said from the door. Pearl beat the elevator. They let her mother in while the nurses hung the magnesium. Pearl came through the curtain with snow still melting on her church coat, took her daughter's face in both hands and pressed their foreheads together, and neither woman said the name of the man who wasn't there, because the room had no space in it for the absent. You listen, Pearl said. You come from women who did this with less, in worse rooms, with nobody's name on the papers downstairs. It's just work, baby, and nobody on this earth outworks you. The first contraction of the induction rolled through her an hour past midnight, low and mean and unmistakable, and Selene Ray set her jaw, found her mother's hand on one side and Renita's on the other, and went to work. Chapter 5. Ezra Ray Voss arrived at 4:52 on a snow-quiet Friday morning, after 19 hours of labor that the nurses on the floor would talk about for a week, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. Because the woman in room 11, pressure medicine in one arm and magnesium making cement of her bones, had labored like it was a shift she'd worked before. Breathing in fours, cracking one dry joke an hour to keep her mother's hands from shaking. And when Dr. Osei finally said the word push, Selene Ray pushed with such collected fury that the resident actually took a half-step back. He came out early and small and furious, 5 pounds 15 ounces of insulted dignity, and screamed before they even finished lifting him. And the sound went through Selene like weather through an open door. There he is, Dr. Osei said, laying him on her chest. Told you, stubborn. Pearl was crying and denying it. Renita was filming and not denying anything, and Selene looked down at the small, furious face, her grandfather's forehead in miniature, and said the name out loud for the first time to the person it belonged to. Ezra, she said, it's you. It's been you the whole time. There was one bad hour after, bleeding that came on hard when it should have slowed, the room filling with quick, quiet people, a bag of someone else's blood running into her arm, while Pearl gripped her hand and prayed with her eyes open. Then it passed. The numbers came back. And by Sunday she was sitting up nursing him, a woman hollowed out and rebuilt in the same weekend, and when a day's called to check on her, Selene listened to the reminder about the status conference in 3 weeks and looked down at the sleeping weight on her chest. I'll be there, she said. You just gave birth. I can appear for you. No judge on earth expects... Adiz. He's had it in writing since November. Her voice was sanded flat with exhaustion and dead level underneath. Not one motion, not one phone call, not one diaper's worth of interest from his whole legal team. I'm done writing to a man who doesn't read. Court's the one room he can't skip, so I'll be in it. With the baby? He's nursing every 2 hours. Where I go, he goes. A pause, and something older than anger moved through the line. Let the record see what it's been keeping. The Franklin County Courthouse on South High Street had a light-filled atrium and metal detectors and the acoustics of a held breath. On the morning of the status conference, Nathaniel Voss arrived in his best grey suit with his attorney on one side, and against that attorney's explicit advice, Bryn Sutter on the other, because Bryn had framed it as loyalty, and he had needed the escort more than he could say out loud. She sat in the back row of the gallery, sleek in camel wool. A spectator at what she'd been promised was a scheduling formality. 15 minutes, his attorney murmured. Magistrate sets the discovery calendar. We're done. Nothing happens today. The double doors opened at 9:03. Nathaniel heard the room change before he understood it. A rustle, a bailiff moving to hold the door, and he turned in his chair, and the floor left the way it had left his wife's dining room in October, silently and all at once. Selene came down the center aisle in a grey dress, thinner than December, her back courthouse straight, and against her shoulder, wrapped in a white knit blanket with his fist escaping it, rode a baby. The aisle was maybe 60 feet. It took her 11 seconds to walk it, and Nathaniel Voss aged a year in each one. He stood up without deciding to. His attorney's hand landed on his arm. Somewhere behind him he heard the small, sharp sound of Bryn's breath, and in front of him, close enough now to see the impossible smallness of the fingers, close enough to see his own father's chin printed on a face 9 days old, his wife walked past him without turning her head, the baby's dark eyes sliding over him with the flat cosmic indifference of the very new. She sat. Adais sat beside her. The magistrate, a silver-haired woman with the affect of a toll booth, glanced up over her glasses and looked 1 beat longer than procedure required. We're on the record in Voss versus Voss. Papers turned. Before we take up scheduling, the answer and counterclaim filed November 19th disclosed a child expected of this marriage. Counsel, I take it there's been a development. There has, Your Honor. Adais rose. Ezra Ray Voss, born February 20th at Riverside Methodist, following a preeclampsia diagnosis and induced labor. Mother and child are here today. We'll be supplementing the record with the birth certificate this week, and given that the child was born during the marriage, the presumption of paternity applies. We'd ask the court to add parenting and support issues to the calendar. So noted, and it's frankly the reason I raised it. The magistrate's eyes moved to the other table, and there was nothing warm in them. Counsel, your client has been on notice of this pregnancy since November 19th. I've reviewed the file this morning. I find no motion regarding the child, no request for temporary parenting time, no inquiry of any kind, 4 months of active litigation over furniture and accounts, and total silence on the only issue in this file that breathes. Can you enlighten me? Nathaniel's attorney rose slowly. A man handed a live grenade by his own client. Your Honor, my client, there was a question of verification. Verification? The magistrate let the word fall from a height. The verification is currently asleep in the second row, counsel. This court expects the parenting issues to be treated from this day forward with the seriousness the last 4 months lacked. We'll set discovery deadlines now and a temporary orders hearing within 30 days, and Mr. Voss. She looked directly at him for the first time, and Nathaniel, who negotiated for a living, could not hold it. The record in this case is permanent. From here on, build one you can stand to read. The gavel didn't bang. It clicked, soft and careful, like a door. What Nathaniel remembered afterward was not the magistrate. It was the 11 seconds, replaying on a loop, and the arithmetic strapped to them. She'd told him in November, in writing, under oath, in the one document he'd read 40 times. His son had been real in the record for 4 months, real through Christmas, real through the discovery fights, real the December morning he'd stood in the market demanding proof from a woman in a loose apron, and he had looked directly at all of it and chosen the version that let him sleep. He learned his child's name from a stranger in a robe, in front of his mistress, because he'd brought her. The hallway outside was marble and too bright. He caught up to them by the elevators, and later he could never say what he'd meant to happen, only that his body had followed the blanket the way a man follows his own wallet, leaving in a stranger's hand. Selene. She didn't stop. Selene, please, 1 minute. Let me see him. Adais pivoted, already inflating, but Selene stilled her with 2 fingers and turned herself, unhurried, shifting Ezra higher on her shoulder, and looked at her husband across 4 feet of marble. No. He's my son. Since when? Her voice stayed level and pitched low, mother low, and it carried anyway. Give me the date, Nathaniel. Was he your son in November when you read it in my answer and called it a tactic? At Christmas? Was he your son in the market, When you stood in front of my ovens asking who tells a husband that way while he was kicking me under my apron with you looking dead at him. She stepped in, one step, and he stepped back before he knew he'd done it. He became your son this morning at 9:07, when a judge said him out loud in front of witnesses and it started costing you something. That's not fatherhood. That's discovery. I didn't know. You knew. 3 feet away, the elevator opened. She didn't move toward it. You had it in writing and you hired your own reasons not to believe it. There's a word for a man who gets to choose what's true, and it isn't father. Then tell me what to do. His voice cracked in the middle, and heads were turning down the hall now, and he had stopped caring, which frightened him more than anything yet. Tell me what you want from me. Nothing. She said it without heat, and that was the wound of it, that it wasn't a blow, it was a balance, read off a ledger. That's what's left, Nathaniel. You wanted it clean. This is clean. She stepped into the elevator with her lawyer and her son, and the last thing he saw before the doors met was Ezra's small fist opening against the white blanket, and then his own reflection in the brushed steel, a man in his best suit, alone with what the record showed. Behind him, 20 feet down the marble, Bryn Sutter stood very still in her camel coat, and her face was doing something no one had ever framed a campaign around, and when he finally turned and walked toward her, she manufactured a smile 1 second too late. Nate, she said. Okay, we just need to think about what this changes. We, he repeated. The word came out of him like something he'd found in his mouth and didn't recognize, and for the first time since the 4th Street deal, Bryn Sutter heard framing fail. Chapter 6. He started with the only person who would still take his calls without a retainer, and that was how Nathaniel Voss came to be sitting in his parents' kitchen in Grove City on a Sunday afternoon, watching his mother refuse to look at him while she dried the same dish for the length of a war. Riverside, Walt said. He'd gotten the account second-hand through the Okafor family pipeline, Columbus being, as he liked to say, 600 small towns wearing a trench coat. 19 hours of labor. They induced her the same night they caught it, because with preeclampsia, the only cure is having the baby. Blood pressure trying to take her apart from the inside. And they hang a medicine that makes your muscles feel like poured concrete. And then, in that condition, she did 19 hours of the hardest work there is. He set his coffee down. Her mother in the room. Her girlfriend in the room. A chair by the window, they tell me, that stayed empty the whole night, because the nurses kept expecting a husband. Walt, his mother said quietly, a warning or a wound. He asked. I'm answering. Walt's eyes never left his son. And after? You know about after? Nathaniel shook his head. He hadn't trusted his voice for a while now. She bled. It happens fast, they tell me, after the baby's out, when everything's supposed to calm down and doesn't. Room fills up with people running quiet. They put another woman's blood in your wife's arm at 6 in the morning, and your mother-in-law stood there holding her hand watching the bag empty. And the whole time, Nathaniel, the whole time, the man on the paperwork was asleep in German village next to a vision board. Walt stood, rinsed his cup, set it in the rack, an old man's punctuation. You asked what happened. That's what happened. Your boy came into the world with a fight, and your wife nearly went out of it, and you found out from a judge. The drive home took 40 minutes, and Nathaniel remembered none of it. What he remembered was doing math again, the new math, the kind with no frame around it. She had been 17 weeks pregnant at the dinner. He counted back, and the number landed on October and would not move. The lettered card, the cake with a name he now knew, the loose apron in December. Every piece of it had been in his hands, in his house, in his kitchen drawer, and he had needed so badly not to know that he'd built a machine for not knowing and hired a woman to keep it running. Bryn was at the house when he got there. She'd let herself in, she was cooking, she'd opened wine, and the domestic staging of it, the sheer confidence of the tableau, struck him for the first time as a kind of architecture. She'd been building here all along, He just hadn't priced what the lot had cost. "So," she said, handing him a glass he didn't take. "I talked to Dana. Don't be mad. Informally, as a friend. But she does family law at her firm. And Nate, this is survivable. It's actually simpler than it looks." Simpler. The baby changes the numbers. It doesn't change the outcome. You still get the divorce. It just costs more, and the cost is manageable if you play the opening correctly. She moved around the island, brisk now, mistaking his stillness for attention. "First move, and Dana agrees. You demand genetic testing, immediately, before any temporary support gets set." The kitchen was very quiet. "A DNA test," he said. "Obviously. Look, in Ohio, a kid born during the marriage is presumed yours automatically, which means right now, you're presumed on the hook for everything. 18 years of everything, on presumption alone." She was gesturing with her glass, fluent in her element, laying out a campaign. "So you test. Best case, and I'm just saying it out loud, you two were barely functional last spring. You said so yourself. Best case, the test comes back, and this whole nightmare belongs to someone else. Worst case, it's yours, fine. But even then, the demand does work for you. It signals you won't be steamrolled. It makes her lawyer price in a fight. Dana says fathers who open with testing settle support 10–15% lower on average, because the other side learns they can't just stop talking." He didn't say it loudly. That was what she would remember after, that it came out at the volume of a man reading a label, and it stopped her cold anyway. "Say the middle part again," he said. "The best case." "Nate." "The best case, Bryn. The best case is that my son isn't mine. The baby I watched come down a courthouse aisle on Tuesday with my father's chin. That's the good outcome we're hoping for." He set both hands on the island because they needed somewhere to be. "And the worst case, the catastrophe in this plan, is that he is mine, but it's fine, because demanding a paternity test against my own wife will save me 10%. That's litigation. That's how it works, everyone." She almost died. The words finally came up, and they came up with the floor attached. 19 hours. They put blood back into her while my mother-in-law watched the bag, and you're standing in her kitchen, drinking her wedding wine, telling me the smart open is to look at that woman across a courtroom and say, "Prove it. One more time. Prove it." The one thing I've said to her since October, the thing I said in that market with my son kicking her ribs. "That's your move, run it back, but this time under oath." Bryn set her glass down with great care, and something rearranged itself behind her face, the campaign yielding to something older and colder, the Zanesville thing, the never again thing. "I'm going to say this once, because someone has to." Her voice was even. "That woman kept your child from you for 4 months. She put him in a court filing in November. I kept him from me. And now you're going to let guilt negotiate your entire future. I've watched you take apart men twice as smart as her lawyer, over 0.5 percentage point, and one hard morning in a courthouse, and you're ready to sign whatever gets handed to you. That's not conscience, Nate. That's collapse." She picked up her coat off the bar stool, unhurried, immaculate. "Call Dana when you're thinking clearly. I'll be at my place." The door clicked, soft and careful. He stood alone in the kitchen a long time, in the house that held sound close and personal, and then he did the thing he had not done since October. He opened the drawer. The menu was where he'd buried it, face down under the takeout flyers, and he laid it on the counter and read it like a document produced in Discovery. Her chalkboard lettering, the chicken, the pears he liked, and at the bottom, underlined with a flourish, honey lavender cake, and he understood at last, with total clarity and no roof anywhere over him, that the cake had been carrying a name that night, and the name had been sitting at the table with them, 17 weeks old and waiting for dessert, and he had slid an envelope across the table into its christening. Nathaniel Voss sat down on his kitchen floor with his back against the cabinets, holding a piece of cream cardstock, and for the first time since he was a boy in Grove City, he wept, and there was no one anywhere in the brick house to hear how it sounded. Chapter 7. The motion went out on a Thursday, and Nathaniel didn't know. That was the machinery of it, the thing nobody tells you about lawyers, that they are engines you start with a sentence and cannot always stop with one. In the bad hour after the courthouse, in the parking garage with his hands still unsteady on the wheel, he had called his attorney and said the worst 6 words of his life. File whatever protects me. All of it. And an attorney, being paid to hear instructions and not tremors, drafts what any attorney drafts when a client says those words in a case with a newborn in it. A motion for genetic testing of the minor child. It sat in a queue, was signed, was filed, was served, and while Nathaniel sat weeping on his kitchen floor with a menu in his hands, the envelope was already traveling toward Aberdeen Avenue like weather that had left the coast. He spent that week learning his son from a distance, which is to say, learning the shape of the whole. Wednesday night, he drove to Linden with no plan, which he understood was becoming his signature. Pearl's house stood yellow-windowed in the dark, snow-banked grey along the curb, and he parked across the street, like every fool in every sad song ever written, and he was actually reaching for the door handle when the front room lamp came on. Solène crossed the window with Ezra against her shoulder. 2 in the morning. She wore a robe, hair wrapped, walking the slow orbit of a woman soothing a child, around the lamp, past the curtains, back. Her mouth was moving, singing something, and through the glass and the snow and 30 feet of February, he couldn't hear a single note, and there it was, the whole sentence passed on him in one image. Visitation through glass at the volume of nothing. Once she stopped and lifted the baby to face her, some conference between them older than words, and whatever Ezra's face did made her laugh, head back, the laugh from the market, and Nathaniel Voss sat in a cold car across from his own family and watched his wife laugh at a joke his son told her at 2 in the morning and understood with a violence that felt physical that the house on Mohawk Street had never been the property. This had been the estate entire, and he'd traded it for a poster board with a beach on it, and no court in Ohio had the power to order 1 minute of it returned. He didn't knock. Some doors you lose at dinner tables, not doorsteps. He drove home and didn't sleep. And in the morning, there were 4 missed calls from Bryn and a text that said, "We need to talk tonight," not a question. And he typed 1 word back because the conversation was owed and he was done leaving debts unpaid. She arrived at 7 and let herself in with her key, and he watched her do it and thought, that too, all the doors I left standing open behind me. She read his face in the hallway light and skipped every preamble she'd rehearsed. "You've decided something. Sit down, Bryn. I'll stand." She kept her coat on, and the echo of October reversed was lost on neither of them. "Say it. It's over. Us. Not because of the courthouse, because of the kitchen." He'd promised himself he'd give it to her straight. No anesthesia. She'd have hated the anesthesia more. "I watched you look at my son's existence and start pricing it, and somewhere in the middle of being sick about it, I understood I was looking in a mirror. That's what I did in November. You were just fluent where I was stammering, and I needed your fluency so I wouldn't have to hear myself. That part's mine, not yours, but I'm done being a man who needs it." Bryn stood very still in the doorway of a kitchen she had cooked in, and then something happened that he had never once seen in 14 months. The framing dropped. All of it. The polish, the angles, the closer's cadence, and what stood there underneath wasn't calculation. It was a tiredness so old it looked inherited. "You want to know where the fluency comes from?" Her voice went flat and quiet, a recitation. "My mother ironed shirts for a married man for 11 years. His name was Gil. He came Thursdays. She'd set her hair Wednesday nights, and I'd sit on the bathroom floor watching her do it, 8 years old, and she'd tell me, 'He's leaving her in the spring, baby.' And here's the part I've never said in this house. She believed it every single spring, and I believed it too till I was maybe 15, and then Gil retired to Port Clinton with his wife, and my mother sent a congratulations card. She looked at him without pleading and without design, just the weary accounting of it. I made one promise on that bathroom floor. I would never be the woman waiting. I'd be the one chosen, whatever it took, whoever it cost. You were supposed to be the proof, Nate. Papers, clean. And then her filing came in November, and I looked down one day and I was standing in my mother's spot, holding the iron, telling myself it's almost spring. The furnace kicked on somewhere below them, and Nathaniel felt the strangest thing this whole strange year had produced in him, grief for her, real and useless, and entirely beside the point. "That's the truest thing you've ever said to me," he said. "And it doesn't change tonight, and I think you already know it doesn't. What happened to your mother was a robbery, but you didn't grow up to be the woman who stops robberies, Bryn. You grew up to be the one holding the bag and calling it strategy. So did I. I can't build on it anymore. Whatever I've got left is going to that boy, and there's no room in that for us." The tiredness closed over like a shop grate coming down, and the frame returned, because it was load-bearing and it was all she had, and she chose it the way people choose a devil already paid for. "Then hear my terms, because I don't do halves." Her chin came up. "I will not date a man doing penance. I won't sit across restaurant tables while you check your phone for a woman who despises you. I won't build my calendar around another woman's custody schedule. And I will not be the practice wife you keep warm while you crawl back toward Lyndon on your knees. So choose, right now, out loud, that baby and all his chaos, or me. Because I promised a little girl on a bathroom floor that I win, Nate. I don't wait." "Then you already know," he said. "It isn't close." The fight that followed was short and ugly the way demolitions are ugly, everything pre-weakened coming down at once. She told him Solène would sooner salt the earth than take him back, that he was torching a real future for a redemption fantasy. And she was probably right, and it changed nothing, and he said exactly that, and his calm was the unforgivable part. She had wanted him torn. He was merely finished. At the door she turned, coat squared, immaculate to the last, and fired the exit line she'd been drafting, he suspected, since the courthouse hallway. "When she slams that door on you, and she will, don't call me, I'm nobody's spring." The door didn't click. It slammed, glass shivering in the panes, and Nathaniel stood in the hallway and waited for the loss to arrive, probing for it the way a man probes for the pain he's owed after the tooth comes out. It never came. That was the discovery of the evening. Worse than the fight. Worse than Gil and the ironing board. 14 months, a marriage spent to finance it, and when the door shut, the house was simply empty, and no emptier than it had been at 6 o'clock, and he understood that he had burned down 9 years for something that left no ash. He was still standing there when his phone rang, and it was Adaeze Okafor's office number, which had never once called him directly, and the voice on the line was not Adaeze, but her assistant, clipped and cold as the month. "Mr. Voss, Ms. Okafor instructs me to inform you that your motion was received today, and that her client will respond in person. She said you'd know what that means." "My motion." The hallway tilted a degree. What motion? But the line was already dead, and across the city on East Broad Street the papers sat where the process server had left them that afternoon, on Pearl Ray's kitchen table, under the hand of a woman who had stopped shaking an hour ago and gone somewhere quieter and far more dangerous, reading for the 4th time the caption line that said, in the state of Ohio's serif type, "Motion of plaintiff for genetic testing of the minor child, Ezra Ray Voss." Chapter 8. She didn't call Adaze back that night. She didn't sleep either. But that was Ezra's doing more than the motions, the 2 o'clock feeding and the 5 o'clock feeding. and in the blue hour between them, Solène sat in Pearl's front room with her son on her chest and the papers on the ottoman where she could see them, and made her decision the way she made all her real decisions, alone, in the dark, once, forever. Pearl found her at 7, dressed, Ezra fed and down, car keys already in her hand. "Mama, I need you to watch him till noon." Pearl looked at the keys, then at the papers on the ottoman, then at her daughter's face, and whatever she found there made her put out one hand. "Solène Marie, whatever you're driving toward, take a breath first." "I've taken 4 months of breaths." She kissed her mother's cheek on the way past. "I'm not going to do anything a lawyer can't fix. I'm going to do the one thing lawyers can't do at all." The offices of Meridian Development Group took the 9th floor of a glass tower on 3rd Street with a view of the Scioto, and the young man at reception was still forming the word appointment when Solène Ray walked past him with the calm of a woman who had labored 19 hours on magnesium and no longer recognized lesser thresholds. Heads came up over cubicle walls the way they do, sensing weather. Nathaniel's door was open. He was at his desk, on the phone, grey-faced from a sleepless night of his own, and when he saw her he stood so fast the chair rolled back and struck the window. "I'll call you back." The phone went down blind. "Solène, don't." She closed the door behind her, which frightened him more than shouting would have. "You don't talk yet. You had lawyers talk for you, so now you get to do what I've done since October. You get to receive." She crossed the office and set a single piece of cream cardstock on his desk blotter, face up, square to the edges, with the care of a dealer laying down the river card. He didn't have to look. He had spent a week learning it by heart on his kitchen floor. Her chalkboard lettering, the chicken with preserved lemon, the pears, and underlined at the bottom with a flourish, honey lavender cake. "You kept it," he said stupidly. "You kept it." Her voice was level, in the way that the sea is level, all that weight just choosing, for the moment, to lie flat. "I threw it away with the dinner, which means you took it out of my trash, Nathaniel, and you've had it. So we're going to do the thing you love. We're going to verify." She tapped the card once over the flourish. "That cake had a name. I hand-lettered a card to stand against your wine glass at dessert, one word on it, and the word was Ezra, and the date of that dinner is on the back in my writing because I saved everything from that night, the menu drafts, the receipts, all of it, in a shoebox, for the baby book. Turn it over." He turned it over. October 9th, her small, neat script, for N, our best news. 17 weeks that night, she said. "You want math? You've finally got a woman who'll give you math. Count forward from October 9th, Nathaniel. Count to a courthouse in the middle of March. Count to a delivery room you weren't in, to a bag of another woman's blood. Count all the way to yesterday, when your name arrived at my mother's house, stapled to a demand that my 9-day-old son open his mouth for a swab so a laboratory can tell you whether he's worth loving." "Solène, I said receive." She never raised her voice, and out on the 9th floor, 30 people were pretending to type. "I made vows to you in front of God, and both our mothers and I kept every one of them through years you don't even know were hard, because I don't perform my labor, I just do it. I lost your first child alone in a hospital while you were in Denver, and I never once made you carry it, and my reward, Nathaniel, is a court document with my baby's name in it under the word testing. So here's what happens now, and it's the last private conversation you and I may ever have, so mark it." She leaned in, both hands on his desk, and he saw with fresh shock how tired she was under the fury, the fatigue stacked like strata, October at the bottom. "You can have your swab. Adesi says fighting it just delays, so fine, run your test. But understand what it buys you. A number, that's all. 99.9. And on the day that number comes back, I will frame it and I will keep it. And when Ezra is old enough to ask about his father, That piece of paper is where I'll start the story. Once upon a time, baby, your daddy paid a laboratory to find out if you were real, because your mama's word, 9 years of your mama's word, wasn't good enough collateral. She straightened up. Or you can withdraw it. Today. Not for me. There is no more me for you. For him. Decide which document raises him. The office was silent, except for the building's own breathing. Nathaniel looked down at the card, at October 9th in her handwriting, at our best news written by a woman 3 hours from having an envelope slid through the middle of it. And when he looked up, his eyes had gone wrong, and he made no attempt to fix them in front of her. I withdrew it at 7 this morning. His voice came out gravel. The moment the office opened, before I knew you were coming. Call a days, she'll have the notice by now. I would never have, I said, file everything to a lawyer in a parking garage on the worst hour of my life, and this is what everything meant, and that's not an excuse, it's just the truth. I own the sentence. I said it. He had to stop. He looked at the card again because it was easier than her face. There's more. My attorney's drawing a stipulation. Paternity admitted on the record. No test, no presumption fights. My name, my son, my support, uncontested, all of it. You'll have it Monday. And I know exactly what it's worth after 4 months of silence, Solène. It's worth Monday, not October, I know. Some of the sea's weight shifted in her then, not softening, redistributing. She had come loaded for a fight, the 5th and biggest, the one she'd been assembling since the process server's polite face, and he had handed her the surrender before her boots hit the beach, and there is a particular vertigo in winning a war at the door, and she stood in it, swaying slightly, a woman who suddenly had nowhere to put 4 months of ordnance. Then we're done here. She reached for the card. His hand moved, involuntary, and stopped short of hers by a full foot, asking nothing. Could I? He said, and had to restart. Not that one, that one's his, for the book. But if there's, you said there were drafts. From that night. I'd pay anything you know. Forget the money. I'm asking, one of the drafts, something from before I ruined it, so that when he's old enough I can show him there was a table, and it was set, and his name was already at it. Solène looked at her husband for a long moment across the blotter, across the card, across the whole burned year, and she made him no answer at all. She slid the menu into her bag and walked out through the silent 9th floor with her back courthouse straight. And Nathaniel stood at the glass watching the river until his hands worked again. The answer came on Saturday, though not from her and not in words. Renita Coles appeared at the house on Mohawk Street at 10 in the morning, handed him a small package wrapped in bakery paper without one syllable of greeting, and left before he'd finished saying her name. Inside was a picture frame, plain black wood, and behind the glass, an ultrasound photograph, grainy silver weather with a curled bright shape riding the middle of it and engraved on the frame's bottom rail in the shop's standard script. A date. October 9th. 17 weeks. Below it, one word. Ezra. He understood what it was and what it wasn't. Not forgiveness, not a door. It was an accurate historical record, released to a man with a proven weakness for those, from a woman who kept everything, and it meant only what it said. There was a table. It was set. Your name was at it. The supervised visit, when a day's and the temporary order finally permitted one, took place the following Thursday in a Franklin County Family Services room with beige walls, a rocking chair, and a one-way window. Solène stood behind with her arms crossed for every minute of the allotted hour. Nathaniel arrived 20 minutes early and sat in his car in the lot, learning to breathe. Inside, the coordinator, a kind, tired woman who had watched 1,000 of these hours, placed Ezra in his father's arms for the first time in his life, positioned his elbow, said, "There, you've got him," and stepped back. Ezra woke, considered the strange new geography holding him, and did not cry. He stared upward with the frank million-year stare of the very new, unbought, unbriefed, owing nothing, and Nathaniel Voss looked down into his father's chin and his wife's dark, unblinking appraisal rendered in miniature, and every deal he had ever closed, every square foot he had ever developed, every number attached to his name dissolved into what they had always been, which was paper, and he bent his head over his son so the coordinator couldn't see his face, and behind the one-way glass, Solène Ray watched her husband's shoulders shake over the only thing he'd never earned, and she felt nothing move in her, and she stood there anyway and did not once look away. Chapter 9. On the first Monday of April, the Franklin County Clerk's office stamped a notice of voluntary dismissal in Voss versus Voss, plaintiff withdrawing his complaint for divorce in its entirety, and the case that had eaten the winter simply stopped existing. Adaise called Solène with the news and got a long silence. "You understand what this means legally?" Adaise said. "You never signed. He's dismissed. You are, at this moment, exactly what you were on October 8th. A married woman." "I understand what the paper says," Solène said, and hung up, and stood in Pearl's kitchen with her hand resting flat on the counter for a while, and told nobody anything. He never announced any of it. That was the strange grammar of Nathaniel Voss that spring, a man conducting his amends in a whisper. The hospital called in April about the balance from February, the delivery, the transfusion, the 4 days, and the billing woman sounded almost apologetic, telling Solène there was nothing to arrange. The account had been settled in full weeks ago, paid by phone. No, she wasn't able to say by whom. The stall's replacement oven arrived on a Tuesday, with the invoice marked paid, and the delivery men under instructions to say only that it was handled. Keisha reported a tall white man in a good coat had come by twice, bought a honey bun both times, asked no questions, tipped like a man apologizing to the jar. He took the parenting class alone. Wednesdays, 7 to 9, a church basement on Parsons Avenue, 11 young mothers, 2 court-ordered fathers, and Nathaniel Voss in his work shirt, learning infant CPR on a rubber doll, taking notes like the bar exam. The instructor told the story later to a friend who happened to know Renita, Columbus being 600 small towns in a trench coat, and Renita relayed it to Pearl's kitchen table deadpan over coffee. "Asked her to stay after class," Renita said. "Wanted to know the right way to warm a bottle for a baby who was 3 weeks early. Wrote down the answer. Grown man, own company, standing in a church basement, writing down bottle temperature." Solène wiped the counter and said nothing, and both older women watched her say it. He came to every pediatric appointment he was told about, and entered none of them. That was the arrangement his lawyer had negotiated, and he never once pushed its walls, parking lot only, and so on the second and fourth Thursdays, Solène would carry Ezra out of Nationwide Children's Primary Care, and there the car would be 3 rows back, and Nathaniel would get out and stand by his door, hands visible, like a man at a border crossing, and she would decide. Some Thursdays, she walked over and let him look at his son for 90 seconds and hear the weight and the percentiles. Some Thursdays she walked to her own car and drove away, and he never followed, never texted, never made her decision cost her anything. That was the part Pearl noticed. "Man's learned the difference between showing up and pressing in," she said in May. "Took him a marriage to learn it, but some men never do." In June the letter came, hand-delivered to Adaise's office, because he no longer trusted himself with doorsteps. 1 page in his own writing, and Adaise passed it along sealed with a shrug that said no legal significance, and Solène read it once at the kitchen table after Ezra was down. It did not ask for anything. That was the entirety of its power. It contained no case for himself, no timeline of his repairs, no motion for reconsideration disguised as feeling. He had boxed up the German village house that week, he wrote, and found her gospel station still set on the kitchen radio, 3rd button, and had stood in the empty room listening to it for a long time, And he understood now that the station was the marriage, something that had been playing quietly in the background his whole adult life, tuned by her hand, and he had never once heard it until the house was hollow. He was writing only to say that he knew, not to be forgiven for it, which he understood was hers to give or keep, like anything else she'd made. Just so that somewhere in the record, which was permanent, it said in his own hand that she had been the whole music, and he had been a man complaining about the furniture. At the bottom, no plea. Only, whatever you decide, ever, I'm the one who's sorry. Warm the bottle to body temperature. Test it on your wrist. I know that now. I'm learning the rest. She folded it back into thirds and put it in the shoebox, on top of the menu drafts. And if her face did anything, the kitchen was empty, and the kitchen kept it. Then June turned, and on the last Friday of the month, Ezra caught a cold. It looked like nothing. 4 months old, a little rasp, a runny nose, half interest in his bottle, and Selene, first-time mother but Pearl Ray's daughter, watched him instead of the clock. By Saturday afternoon the rasp had a rattle under it, and by evening she was counting his breaths against her phone's timer with her stomach going cold and even, that delivery room coldness, the coldness that worked. 62 a minute, his nostrils flaring, and when she pulled his onesie up, the small, shocking sight of his ribs showing with each breath, the skin sucking in around them like fabric over a fan. Renita, on the phone, school nurse flat. That's retracting, that's now, Selene. Children's not urgent care. Go. The emergency department at Nationwide Children's on a summer Saturday night was its own weather system, and they took one look at a 4-month-old former 36-weeker, breathing 60+ with retractions, and the triage nurse's face did the thing that professional faces do, which is nothing, fast. The letters came within the hour, RSV. Late for the season, the resident said, but the season had run long this year, and premature lungs kept their grudge past the first birthday. Bronchiolitis, moderate going on worse. Oxygen level at 91 and drifting. Admitted. She called Pearl from the hallway. She called Renita. And then she stood with her thumb over the third name for a long moment, the name she had every right to skip, the name that 4 months of parking lots had earned exactly this much, and she pressed it. He answered on the first ring at 11 at night, wide awake, as if he had spent 4 months sleeping next to the phone, which, she would learn much later, was exactly true. It's Ezra, she said, Children's RSV. They're admitting him. I'm not asking you for anything, I'm informing you because you're his father, and this is what informing looks like. Silence for 1 second. Then, which entrance did you come in? I won't come to the floor. I won't come near the room unless you say the words. But I'm going to be in that building while my son is in that building, and I'll sit in the lobby till Christmas, if that's the geography you give me. Emergency entrance, she said, and hung up. He sat in the hallway. That was the geography she gave him, after midnight, a vinyl chair outside the unit doors where he could see the hallway that led to the hallway that led to his son, and Nathaniel Voss sat in it like it was the front pew. He was there when Pearl arrived at 1, and she looked at him a long moment and nodded once, which from Pearl was a treaty. He was there at 4, when Selene came out for coffee she didn't drink, and he stood and asked no questions, and she found herself telling him anyway, the oxygen number, the little mask Ezra kept batting at, the way he'd cried himself out and gone worryingly quiet, and Nathaniel listened with his whole stripped face and said only, You caught it Saturday. The counting, the ribs, you caught it a day before most people would have. He's got the right mother, and went back to his chair, and she went back through the doors, and neither of them named what had just happened, which was the first conversation of their marriage in 9 months. Sunday he stayed. Sunday night the numbers slid. It happened the way the nurses had warned it could, day 3 of RSV being the summit, the oxygen requirement climbing through the evening, 91 on the mask becoming 89, the monitor's chime going from occasional to conversational, and then a resident, and then an attending, and then the words high flow and not responding the way we'd like, and the sentence that removed the floor entirely, we're going to move him to intensive care, it's precautionary, it's support. And Solène stood in the hall while they wheeled the whole apparatus of her son away and felt Pearl's hands on her shoulders from behind and did not fall, because falling was for women whose babies could afford it. The pediatric ICU waiting room at 3 in the morning was empty and fluorescent and endless. Pearl had gone to pray in the chapel, her own kind of ICU. Solène rode the elevator down to sign the new consents and rode it back up with the forms still in her hand, and the doors opened on the waiting room, and she stopped. Bryn Sutter stood beside the coffee machine in a weekend blazer, her hand on Nathaniel's forearm. She'd heard, of course. Columbus, 600 small towns. Walt's wife had told a cousin, the cousin knew everyone, and Bryn had driven here at 3 in the morning on the strength of it, arriving at the exact hour a man is weakest, saying something low, her hand on his arm above his sleeve, on the ICU floor where Solène's son lay under a mask, fighting for his numbers, and Nathaniel's back was half turned, and Solène could not see his face, could only see the composition of it, the two of them arranged together against the vending light, like the photograph October had always been developing toward. Solène did not scream. She did not cross the room. She stood in the open elevator with the consent forms in her hand, and made no sound at all, which was infinitely worse. And it was the silence he felt, the way you feel a window open behind you, and Nathaniel turned and saw his wife's face, and watched 9 months of parking lots, and church basements, and paid invoices, and one honest letter burn down in the reflection of her eyes, in under a second. Solène. He stepped back from Bryn's hand so fast the coffee machine rocked. This is not... She came on her own. I didn't, Solène. Solène looked at him for one more second. Then she looked at Bryn, who did not remove her hand from the air where his arm had been, whose chin came up a professional 1/4 inch. My son is on the other side of that wall, Solène said very quietly, to neither of them and to both. And this is what came to visit. She turned and walked to the ICU doors and pressed the intercom and was admitted. And the doors sighed shut behind her with their soft pneumatic click, careful and final, the sound of a man being shown out of a life for the second time, and Nathaniel Voss stood in the fluorescent waiting room at 3 in the morning, between the woman he had chosen once and the closed door that held everything he had ever actually owned. His son's numbers falling on one side of the wall, his last 9 months dying on the other, and for the first time since October, he understood that a man can do everything right for 200 days and still lose it all to a single photograph he never posed for. Chapter 10. Ezra turned the corner at dawn, the way babies do, without ceremony, making liars of the worst hours. The high-flow numbers held, then eased. By Tuesday, the mask came off. By Thursday, he was back on the regular floor, insulted about everything, batting at nurses, roaring for bottles, and the attending used the word discharge. And Solène slept for 4 hours in the chair beside his crib, with her hand through the rails and her finger inside his fist. Nathaniel had left the building Monday at noon. Not the vigil, the building, and only because Walt drove up and stood over him and said, "Son, you smell like a bus station. You'll be no use to that boy dead," and drove him home and sat in his kitchen while he showered, an old electrician keeping watch on a rewired man. What Nathaniel did not do was call, text, explain, litigate, or send flowers with cards full of context. He had spent 9 months learning the one lesson, that his explanations were a currency her country didn't accept, and so he paid in the only tender that had ever moved her. He came back Tuesday and sat in the hallway. He came back Wednesday. He said nothing about the waiting room at all. It was Bryn who said something, and that was the last thing anyone would have framed. She came to the North Market on the last Saturday of July, in the mid-morning lull, no blazer, and stood in front of the stall until Solène looked up from the case, and the two women regarded each other across the pastry glass for the first time in their lives at conversational distance. 2 minutes, Bryn said. Then I'm gone, and I mean gone. Keisha, Solène said, without looking away. Take the register. They stood at the end of the aisle by the flower vendor, and Bryn kept her hands in her pockets and delivered it like a closing she'd rehearsed against her will. He ended it in March, the week after the courthouse, not paused, not complicated, ended in his kitchen, and I said things on my way out I'd planned for a month. The hospital in June, nobody invited me. I heard your son was in intensive care, and I drove there at 3 in the morning because I told myself he'd need someone. And the truth is, I went because he was weak, and weak men change their minds, and I have been raised my whole life to arrive on Thursdays. Her voice stayed level, only her jaw paid the cost. He took my hand off his arm before you were 3 steps out of that elevator. He'd have done it if you never came up at all. I'm not here for him, he doesn't know I'm here, and I'm not here to be forgiven. I'd rather you didn't, honestly. It would be one more thing to carry. I'm here because I watched my mother get robbed by a lie nobody ever corrected, and I swore I'd never be her. And standing in that waiting room, I finally did the math on which person in the story I'd actually become. She took a breath. So, correction for the record. He chose the baby, months ago. Whatever you do with that is yours. I'm moving to Chicago in September. She was 4 steps gone when Solène spoke. Bryn. The woman stopped. Your mother wasn't the lie. She was just the one holding it. Put it down before Chicago. It's heavy for no reason. Bryn Sutter stood with her back turned for a moment, and her shoulders did something small, and then she walked out through the market doors into the summer, out of the story, human. August came in hot and ordinary was the country where the marriage would live or die, and Solène knew it. Anyone can be magnificent in an ICU. The question was Tuesdays. So on the 2nd Tuesday of August, parking lot day, she carried Ezra out of his checkup and crossed the 3 rows to where Nathaniel stood by his door, hands visible, border crossing still, after everything. And she tested him one last time with the truth, because the truth was the only instrument that had never once lied to her. There's a space in Cincinnati, she said. Findlay Market, a real bakery, brick oven, 4 times my square footage, and the broker's holding it for me till Labor Day. 2 hours away, Nathaniel. Your son, 2 hours away, and your parking lots and your hallway chairs and your 2nd and 4th Thursdays all turn into highway. She watched his face with a merchant's eyes. Tell me why I shouldn't take it. And Nathaniel Voss, who had negotiated for a living his entire adult life, who could have built her a case with Columbus in it, custody logistics in it, us in it, stood in the August heat with his son's dark eyes on him and said the only thing left in his inventory, which was the lesson. I can't. His voice came out quiet and final. Findlay Market's a cathedral, and you'd own it inside 3 years, and anybody who tells you to shrink your life so his stay's convenient is running the same play I ran on you for 9 years, just slower. So I won't be him. If it's Cincinnati, I'll be on that highway twice a week and glad of the drive. He stopped and made himself finish it. You built everything I ever watched you build from a folding table, Solène, and the only time it ever went small was around me. Whatever you decide like I'm not in the equation. I forfeited the equation. The parking lot hummed. Ezra grabbed a fistful of his mother's collar and ate it. The broker called Monday, Solène said. I told her no. He went very still. I told her no because my mother's on Aberdeen Avenue and my ovens are on Spruce Street and my son's pediatrician knows his lungs and because I don't make 2-hour decisions to test a man. She shifted Ezra to her hip and looked at her husband across the last 3 feet of the whole burned year. The test was the answer, Nathaniel, and for the first time since October 9th you passed it. She let him hold his son in a parking lot for real then, no coordinator, no glass. And she watched, and her arms stayed crossed, and something in her shoulders finally, minutely, came down from around her ears, where it had lived since a manila envelope landed in a drop of sauce. The marriage did not resume. That was the point she made on the first Sunday of September at Pearl's table, over a dinner she cooked, and he was invited to like the guest he'd made himself, with Pearl presiding like a magistrate who had also baked the rolls. It began again, which was a different country with harder borders. Counseling, Thursdays, a therapist a days recommended with the note, "This one takes no prisoners." Dinners earned one at a time. A husband dating his own wife with a curfew, driving back to a rented apartment in Merion Village at 10 o'clock because the house on Mohawk Street stayed hers, and his return to it would be a decision, not a drift. "You built the deficit over years," Selene told him on the porch, the first night she let the goodbye run long. "You'll retire it the same way. There's no refinancing me." "I know," he said. "I've seen your paperwork." And she laughed. It escaped before she cleared it. One real note in the September dark. The market laugh. And Nathaniel Voss stood on his mother-in-law's steps and received it like a man being handed back $1 of a fortune he'd burned, which is not the fortune, but is legal tender, and does spend. The cake went back on the board on a Tuesday in October, 1 year to the week. No announcement. Keisha just chalked it up on the special side in Selene's own lettering, honey lavender cake, and under it, small, the name Ezra's cake, and the regulars who knew nothing bought slices, and the 2 or 3 people in the world who knew everything saw it and understood that a door had been set ajar, not opened ajar, which is how the Ray women did their mercy incrementally with receipts. Nathaniel came in at the 4 o'clock lull, as it happened. Off the second and fourth Thursday rhythm now, just a Tuesday, just a man stopping by his wife's stall with his son's diaper bag over his shoulder because he carried it everywhere like a briefcase now, and he saw the board and stopped and stood in the aisle where she had once given him 1 minute for 9 years. Selene watched him read it. She let him stand there a moment in the bread-smelling warmth, in the ordinary Tuesday, in the small mercy of the chalk. "Well," she said, "you waited a year to try it. Sit down, Nathaniel." He sat. She cut the slice herself and set it in front of him on the good plate, the one she kept at the stall for no reason she'd ever admitted, and their son slapped both hands on the counter demanding his share of everything, as was his right, as had been the whole idea from the beginning. And outside the market the city went on about its business, 600 small towns in a trench coat, holding its sound close and personal, keeping the record, which is permanent, and which showed, as of that Tuesday, one table set again with every name at it.